Wow, Dr. Billy Garvey, episode 73 in the bag. Second part of developmental trauma. What are people going to learn this week?
Yeah, so a lot of stuff, and this is really probably the most challenging topic we've covered. We have some really deep, vulnerable, honest questions that have come in, especially in the second half. And I think just another call out to the amazing resources that are available. Every country is different, but in Australia, I think Lifeline's really powerful, 13, 11, 14. But reach out to people around you. We're all trying to get better at this, but if this does find, a lot of stuff comes up, feel free to kind of reach out.
Yep.
Professionals, loved ones, all that stuff.
Yep. We had thousands of engagements across social media this past month across these two episodes. So it's been huge and a lot of people keen to learn more. So guys, listening, hope you enjoy the episode and get a lot out of it. Thanks very much.
Hi, I'm Billy, a developmental paediatrician.
And I'm Nick, a developing parent.
We're going to use scenes from iconic movies to talk about how we best support our kids.
This is Pop Culture Parenting.
Hey, don't let your mother smell that beer on your breath. She'll take it out on me.
I don't want to see you again for the rest of my whole life. I don't want to see anybody else either.
Who is your daddy and what does he do?
Just use your best judgment. We trust you.
Good evening, Dr. Billy Garvey. Bit unusual for us.
Yes. We've had to go a little a touch early, but we're just dedicated to the cause, and it's it's actually funny to do it in the evening. I don't know if you're a morning person, so
well, you seem to say that, which made me think I wasn't so good at night. A little bit more nocturnal. I'm getting more rest these days. So thinking back to when we first started, I was kind of where you're at now with the little ones, and it's kind of like the start can be tiring, and I wasn't much chop at night. No, by the time we got to night, because we did record a lot in the evening when we first started.
Yes, that's right. A lot of evenings. Yeah, it was a bit harder. We weren't as regimented back then.
Now it's been a little bit loosey goosey. Now look at us, Billy.
Yes.
My goodness.
All the gear.
All the people. I don't need a coffee. All right, guys, thanks.
And how have you found since the last step? Developmental trauma, big topic.
Big topic, yeah. And obviously lots of people coming in on that particular topic, which has been, different. Not a light topic. Probably the least, or probably the heaviest topic that we've done.
Yeah, and lots of, we're going to cover it, but we, I think about 2 hours before you came, I thought I cannot cut this any more than 40 longs. And I spent 2 hours cutting 29 longs out that all deserve to be in it. So amazing stuff's coming in. I'm going to capture all of that, like obviously we have, but do something with it, because we could almost done, honestly, like 3 reflection episodes just on the stuff that came in, but tried to pick stuff that'll be really helpful broadly and go deeper into it. But really big thing that's, I see a lot in clinics, so it's really helpful to think about this, and the questions that we've got, I think, will be really helpful. But polls.
First things first, to the polls. So we ask some questions via Instagram each week, and they come through, and we love your answers, so please keep participating in those. Billy, first one. Did you have developmental trauma as a child? 50% of the audience said yes.
Yeah. So, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I did say yes, to be honest. I was thought about sharing this or not sharing this week. But yeah, I did. I experienced developmental trauma as a child once that I can remember.
Yeah, okay.
It wasn't great.
Yeah.
It was,
And in that, I think it's really interesting because some of the questions that we haven't included talked about that kind of household dysfunction one, and saying like, I didn't realise that was, traumatic, or I didn't realise that was an adverse childhood experience. And, the kind of abuse is the one that we think about, but we know that neglect and household dysfunction can also have a similar impact.
Yeah, it was one of the ladders. It wasn't abuse, but it was rough. So I remember it, and try not to remember it, but I know that's not the tactic.
No, we'll talk to that as well. But I think the interesting thing is then how it informs your parenting, and we'll have some questions about that.
Sure does.
Think about that. So yes, but to be honest, I was surprised that it's not higher than that. But then the second question.
Yes, the second one. Do you know how to protect your kids from trauma? 68% said no. It's more than 2/3.
Yeah, really honest though, because the big thing that we're trying to do with this podcast is psychoeducation that's really helpful and practical and evidence based. So it's great that we have this huge privilege to talk about this stuff, given how many people are feeling like they're a bit lost in it.
Yeah, given I think both across the first question and the second question, for me it's like quite a large spectrum. I know you talked about 3 different categories of developmental trauma. But I think particularly on that one, protect your kids from trauma, I think some things are out of your control. And we get that into some of the latter questions where that does happen. And so I don't know how to protect against that.
Yeah, I think you do. I'm going to draw you in on some of them safely. I won't put you on the spot. Well,
Okay.
Not too much. But I think you do, mate. I think you're very good at practically thinking about how you protect the girls and all that stuff. So we'll talk to that. And then poll question 3.
Who was the best Batman? So we had Christian Bale, Michael Keaton, Ben Affleck, and James Pattinson?
No, Robert.
Robert, sorry.
Yeah,
I
that's
love
okay.
him. I don't know. I got froze up there.
Well, if he's listening, he'll be very upset. Do you know we have
Sorry, Jim.
one of the amazing Game of Thrones actors liked
really?
our stuff? Yeah,
Who?
Yeah.
Okay.
Daenerys, sorry.
Sorry, Daenerys.
Helper.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah, she was great. So tell me
Who's the
who's
best
your favourite
Batman?
Batman?
I was kind of torn. I think it's Bale, but I feel like it's a bit recency.
Yeah.
Quite like Keaton. Just
Keaton.
because that's what I was when I was a kid watching it.
Yeah.
But yeah. What about you?
Yeah, so I'm massive on Bale. Like, so if there was a bit of criticism that came through on the polls about why wasn't it more, and in my defence, you only had to choose 4, so I did struggle with which 4 I would pick.
There's no Adam West.
No, there's no Adam West. There's no Kilmer. Clooney is the photo. The photo that I chose is Clooney with the famous batsuit with nipples on it.
Yeah.
So that's why I picked that photo.
Yeah.
And but no, I think West is amazing. There's all these voice actors that are phenomenal as well. But yeah, Bale for me is just he was so amazing in this role. So it was really great that a lot of people sent in how much they love Batman Begins and seeing it through a new lens. But now the shorts.
Yeah.
I narrowed this down to 20. But I think that hopefully the challenge you always have is like making me not take 2 hours to answer all this.
No, that's fine. You cut yourself some slack. Like, for anyone listening, Billy goes through all of these and wants to answer all of them, and we basically have to protect Billy from Billy. That's the problem.
Yes.
He's like,
Yes.
yeah, I got it down to 40. Well, it would honestly have been closer to 200. It's just like, mate, you can't. It's a podcast.
Just wait and see our families for 3 days.
Yeah, it's a new medium. We can do what we want to an extent, mate, but like we don't have 90 hours.
We could just become Rogan to 3.5 hour episodes.
If you get YouTube, you might get paid by the minute. So we
start
just do
stringing it
marathons. Anyway, let's crack on. So you don't have to fly through them. I'll speed you up if I think we need to be sped up.
Okay.
But we do have 20 short questions. Then we're going to go into the longs. You guys know how it is. You've been listening before. Do the polls. Then we do some short answer questions. Then we do some long, more complex ones. And this week, certainly a lot of complexity to questions, but really useful for people. A lot to relate to. Okay, Billy, here we go. How bad does it have to be to call it trauma?
Yeah, it's a great question, and one thing that comes through a lot in this talk and others about, there's some kind of concern that we overuse that term. Is it really traumatizing? There's a beautiful question that I couldn't include about, I really struggle. I'm from a privileged family and community. We have a lot of resources, and I feel like I can't acknowledge or talk about my own trauma because a lot of people have worse. Now, I totally understand where that person's coming from, but actually the child decides, and we'll talk about what the symptoms are and how you can tell, but the kid decides if it's trauma or not in how they act out. Kids aren't really putting on trauma. It's really thinking about there are kids that have had all the experiences that we've talked about that really increases their chance, doesn't guarantee their chance, but of having that functional impact. So it's not so much how bad does it have to be to make that to step over that line, but it's really some kids will find, experiences traumatizing that other kids wouldn't.
Yep.
And then some kids have this amazing ability to have, tolerance for they have such a broad window of tolerance that they can tolerate a lot of adversity and be okay.
Okay. All right. That's good, yeah. Yeah, kids are different. They're all different, right? Yeah. Okay, cool. Billy, is it possible to tell if your child is developing trauma and course correct it?
Yeah, it's beautiful. I included that because I just love the course correct piece.
Yeah.
So that's everything. Course correction is everything. Now, it is possible to tell. And we've talked a lot about on this podcast about how the medical model can be too narrow, it can be too negative, it's very deficit-based and all that stuff. But I think it can be helpful in thinking about how do we tell if kids have, experienced trauma or are demonstrating trauma. We talk about functional impact.
Yep.
You can think about kind of 4 core things that will be symptoms or a demonstration of a kid struggling with trauma. The first is, intrusive thoughts. So they often will have an intrusion into their feelings and thoughts and emotions following that traumatic event or those series of traumatic experiences. Now, some kids will talk about it and they can't because it's just happening all the time. Other kids, it'll intrude in other ways, such as nightmares. Not every kid that has nightmares has experienced trauma, but it is a significant thing that we see in a lot of kids who have experienced trauma, and it's having an impact on them. The other bit is avoidance. So they will avoid either the feelings, and you can think about this in the stuff that you might have experienced that was traumatic. You talked about at the start of this app. I try not to think about it. That's a symptom or a sign of someone that's experienced trauma. They will also avoid certain triggers, and we've got some questions about school, relationships, depth of friendships, intimate partners. A lot of people will have avoidance strategies because of that experience that they've had. Does that kind of make sense?
Yep.
The other one is we see an increase in kind of negative perceptions or symptoms, such as shaming themselves, feeling guilty, I'm not good enough, everyone is out to get me. A lot of that negativity is really permissive and comes through and functionally impacts kids who have experienced trauma, or a lack of positivity we see as well. They're not hopeful, they don't see the good in others, all of those things. Then the fourth one is what we call arousal. And that's what we see a lot of the kids in schools that struggle is they're really hyperactive, they're really quick to hostility, and they're threat-seeking all the time. So those 4 things can be really helpful. Intrusion, so intrusive thoughts, avoidance, increased negativity, and the final one being that arousal. And we'll talk a little bit more in the longs about that.
Okay, awesome. Thanks for that. They're good ones. Hey, how can I help my child feel safe enough to tell me if they experience trauma?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And that's actually what all of us are aiming for. Like we talked about the positive childhood experiences last time, and how a key one of them is, feeling safe to come and talk to people about your feelings. And we actually do that, in the way that we parent. So we want to make sure that we will always feel like our kids will come to us, and that connection and safety trumps any kind of consequence, if that makes sense. I don't know about you, but a lot of the time I wouldn't come because of things like that.
Yep. You don't want to get a bollocking.
Yeah.
Yes. No, that makes absolute sense to me.
Yeah. So making sure that we're really open. The other thing is that we've got to be careful sometimes that we don't be like, mate, I'll always listen to you and believe you, whatever you say. But then you kind of dismiss other people in conversation with them and say, oh, he's just being soft or whatever, things like that. Because kids will see that and go, geez, Dad says that I'm always safe to come to him. But, he talks about how soft his mate is because he's struggling with X, Y, Z.
Classic do a show as opposed to tell.
It's really important with this one.
I got one for you, like non-medical tip for you. I've got one that I know one parent growing up, a mate of mine's parent had this policy of you can call me 3 times in your life as a teenager to come and get you, pick you up, and I will not ask you a single question about how you've ended up in this situation or location at this time of morning. So you can call me if it's 2 a.m. and you're on the other side of the city and you're meant to be staying at your cousin's house. You just call me. You can jump in the car. You can talk if you want. No dramas. Just call me. Get 3 of those. Like a 3 strikes. I'm not saying it's what you do, but I always thought that's great. I can get in. Dad will just drive me home. Probably won't take me through Macca's to do the thing, but But I always thought that was a really cool policy. I was like, yeah,
so
I could always call my dad and he'd just come and get me.
Yeah, there's something really beautiful about that.
Yeah.
I feel like I would have burned through it in about a month. I remember my mum only found out I got kicked out of high school because I was waiting for a different bus. She's like, "What are you doing?" I remember she rolled past in the Mitsubishi Magna, was it? Wagon, couldn't get up hills, and she rolled past and went down the window and was like, "What are you doing at this time for this bus?"
Yeah.
And then, there was no unconditional phone call.
A lot more buses though, I'm sure. I wasn't dropping you anywhere. All right, Billy, can you chat further about neurodiverse diagnosis that stems specifically from trauma, and how do you differentiate? Billy, we had a video on our social that went through the roof on this one.
Yeah, this was one of them that went off, wasn't it?
Thousands of likes.
Yeah.
Dozens of comments, hundreds and hundreds of shares. And you can see it all there. I'm not making the numbers up. Anybody can go look at it.
It's like 3 people have watched it.
No, I last checked, and there's tens of thousands had watched it.
Yeah.
But people were sharing this one and tagging mates and saying, yeah, isn't this the truth?
Do you know the funniest thing is, I think I started with like, there's 3 things about this, and then I just mentioned one of them. Classic me. But it's, the 3 things are important. The one that we talked about is that the kind of the risk in not thinking deeply about what might be going on, and it can be both, of course.
Yep.
The second thing talks to it can be both. Kids with neurodiversity are at greater risk of experiencing trauma. So that's what we don't think about much, but we go like kids with anxiety or kids with, attention deficit hyperactive disorder, they are more prone to experiencing what we talked about, developmental trauma, because they are more likely to be in a dysfunctional household because of the contribution that their difficulties makes to that household being dysfunctional. They are harder to parent. As I've said heaps of times, kids with ADHD are my favourite kids to see, but they are little hurricanes. They're disorganised and it's really tough. So the first one, the misdiagnosis, the second one being like a greater risk of trauma. The third one is really important as well, is that traumatic experiences for kids with those conditions amplifies how much they struggle and the impact functionally. If you take, we're going to have a question later about this, but if you take a child with anxiety without trauma and they experience trauma, the impact on them functional is devastating. It's the same with autism. It's the same with ADHD. It's the same with depression.
Just feel it more.
They feel it more. It's just, they're more vulnerable to it. We've got a future one about temperament. But that's the thing with trauma, why we need to think about it a lot. And it's a really helpful kind of lens to make sure we think about, what's the impact that those, experiences have had on the kids that we're supporting in clinic, in schools and communities.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you. I keep saying thank you after every...
It's all right. You're going to say it
yeah,
31 times.
I know. Hey, does watching your favourite rugby team lose count as trauma? Asking for a friend. I reckon I know the bloke that put this in there.
Yeah, I think you do too. It's great to see him active in the chat though. A very diehard All Black supporter. But it's interesting though, because that is sometimes where we think, like, as much as that's funny, we sometimes, need to make sure. So do you know, I can't remember how much I went into detail about this, but developmental trauma is about risk to safety. So that's what it really is at its core. So you directly experience risk to your safety.
Okay.
The explosion you talked about.
Right.
Or, seeing, or the abuse that you experience. That's a risk to your safety. And that's not neglect, because emotional or physical neglect is a risk to your safety.
Yes.
Because you're not getting your basic life needs met.
Yep.
It's also a risk to someone else, especially a primary caregiver. So you're observing that.
Yeah.
And that's the parent who's, having violence inflicted upon them. That is traumatic to that child.
Yep.
But we also know about vicarious trauma. We had a lot of questions that didn't make the cut about this. Hearing about a threat to the safety of someone, especially a primary caregiver, after the event, you didn't even see it, that is developmental trauma and can significantly impact a kid. Even though it didn't happen to them, they didn't witness it, but hearing about that stuff, it really threatens their safety and security in the world.
So a kid with high empathy would probably wear on them.
Yes, so that is coming up in a short, I think. So yes, but great question.
No worries. Oh, thanked me that time.
Yes.
Okay. Are highly sensitive kids more at risk for developmental trauma? I feel like you might have kind of answered
No,
that.
but it's yes. Yeah, so the answer is yes. They're not guaranteed. That's the important thing about the awkward stuff, and I think we did that maybe I don't know.
Oh,
episode
Sensitive
5 or
Kids is a
something.
ripper.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yes, people love that one, which
Parenthood.
is awesome. Yeah, I saw which one was it? Dumb and Dumber got a shout out recently. I was like,
Did?
thank God, because
You love
I
that
love
one.
that one. But yeah, so the reason is because temperamental sensitivity paired, this is where the evidence shows us that the biggest impact on sensitive temperaments is a lack of flexibility in parenting.
Say that again.
So
Sorry, everyone.
the sensitive kid, no, this is good. The sensitive kid, sensitive temperament, the reason, there's lots of reasons, they are really vulnerable to the environment we've talked about. So traumatic experiences can be really negative on them. But what often happens is those sensitive kids, especially if they've experienced trauma, a primary caregiver who is inflexible is one of the biggest risk factors. Now, we should, I know this is a short, but we should be clear about what we mean by being inflexible.
Go for it.
Sometimes families will alter their strategy too frequently. The little baby that they're like, he needs to be changed, he needs to be rocked, he needs to be fed, he needs to be put down. And if you cycle through that too quickly, that lack of kind of commitment to a certain strategy is not too flexible, but it's just not consistent and giving enough time for that co-regulation strategy or whatever you're doing to work. But the power that we talk about in parenting is reflective practice, and that is, how is my kid going? I influence that in a big way. Maybe I should modify. So the kids who have sensitive temperaments that might have experienced, say, household dysfunction, our flexibility is really important. How is this strategy going? And so that's where the pairing of developmental trauma and sensitive temperaments comes in, that we just need to make sure that we have a willingness to adapt and think, maybe my strategy of how I parent this kid needs to be modified a little bit. And the kid should always lead us.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that'll come up again.
Okay. Great. Billy, could the COVID lockdowns be a form of trauma for kids?
Yeah, definitely, because what we just talked about before was this threats to safety. So a lot of kids, it was a direct threat. I don't know about you, it was really traumatizing for a lot of people because they're like, what's going to actually happen? There was a lack of certainty, collective anxiety. We also lost, if you think about it, so many of those positive childhood experiences.
Yeah.
Because you lost the connection, the sense of purpose, the participation in community traditions, the school community, all that stuff disappeared as our collective anxiety rose. And we saw a lot of people lost loved ones, like people lost their jobs, like it was horrible. I every week almost, I think I would meet someone in clinic that still hasn't returned to school from the pandemic. And it's not to say that every kid needs to be in school, but these are kids that want to be in school, but they're not.
Why not?
So the world got really scary. The world became easier. So this is such a long answer, but so maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I worked on a involuntary kids psych ward, and I was always like, oh, this will be full of kids just trying to break out of the place. The opposite is true. There's kids trying to get in there, almost every day.
Why?
Because it's really safe and predictable and there's no threats, and these are loving parents and everything, but these kids have just got mental illness and trauma and all these things they've experienced that, the world being so predictable in this small environment where you have these amazing mental health nurses that are just there, they're predictable, they're responsive and all that stuff, is that world is small enough that those kids don't feel threatened and they can succeed on that small level. Pandemic opened up couple of times and everyone kind of hesitated, and a lot of kids really struggled to go back into those broader, more challenging environments, and you can understand why. And once again, that'll come up in a later question as well.
Okay. If I lose my temper, how can I tell if I've caused trauma?
It's great. You told a beautiful story about this actually, where you were kind of talking about like losing it. And as we talked about, it's actually in the recovery, we should not set up a unachievable expectation on a lot of us, including me, that we never lose our temper. What we should be clear about is that consistently losing our temper without any recovery might be detrimental to the feeling of safety and security that kids experience in their family. So it's really important that we work on it, and I think our first long is a beautiful demonstration of that.
Yep. Am I effing up my kids with my emotional response to the illogical, repeated, explosive behaviour?
What do you think about that one?
Understand the question.
As in on a theoretical level, or
I understand, like, illogical, repeated, explosive behaviour is tough to deal with when you. And how do you meant to keep you cool during that? I get that. I think it all comes to recovery. Like, you can only recover. You can recover and curve and we do reflective practice. I get that, but you can. Once you do it, you just got to try and recover and then try and not do it again.
And what that person talked about, course correct.
Exactly.
That's the key.
Yeah.
So the reflective practice is like, it's nothing if you just go, geez, I shouldn't have blown up like that. And then you just keep doing exactly the same thing. And that's not purely on you. We've talked about the village and communities and stuff, but understanding these windows are really difficult for a lot of kids, especially. So, typical developing kids will, 18 months of age, we start to see those tantrums, and it's like 4 to 5 before a lot of them start settling down. So that window is super challenging. So for a lot of people, and a lot of kids just don't modify beyond that, and this is the problem about like emotional regulation. Primary school educators are phenomenal at it, but a lot because they have to do it so much to get through their day, but high school teachers aren't trained in it well because it's like, well, no, I shouldn't have to help a kid emotionally regulate. They're not toddlers anymore.
They should be fine.
But a lot of kids have not developed that skill. A lot of adults haven't.
But yeah, if they've had that trauma, then they arrive in year 7 or something, and it's like, oh, well, now you're still at an emotional level of a 2-year-old.
Yeah, or an 8-year-old or whatever it is. Yeah, and so you've got to go right back, and it's really challenging. So that's the adapt or the course correction that person talked about is the important bit. But you're not stuffing up your kids if kind of completely unpredictable emotional eruptions from them is leading to a response that you're not super proud of on reflection. It's just that course correction's the key.
Yeah, cool. Billy, how would you know if school avoidance anxiety is a symptom of trauma or caused by clinical anxiety? Yeah. To add to this, I'd love to know the difference between like trauma and kind of mental illness. I know they're completely different, but like, do the impacts look the same? Is that what that person's kind of asking?
Yeah, so the differentiation is that traumatic experience has to be a part for developmental trauma. There has to be that experience. Now, it doesn't mean it was like a life or death, hostage situation. It can be something less than that, such as bullying, can be the traumatic experience that then causes what we talked about before, the intrusive thinking, impact on emotions, reliving the bullying in your mind. And that's why like Vietnam vets taught us all this because everyone thought they were psychotic, but everyone's like, I actually think they're reliving the battlefield, and that's what's actually going on for them. So the bright lights of the supermarket makes them think of, the explosions in the sky or whatever. And for a lot of kids, they relive that. And I can relate to that personally. You kind of get stuck in that process of that memory just repeating itself in your mind and viscerally, which we might come to later. Clinical anxiety doesn't have that requirement of a traumatic experience. It has the requirement of excessive fears and worries impacting your sleep, your appetite, your function, your agitation, your focus, and all that stuff. So there's a lot of overlap. A lot of kids who have developmental trauma will show us by being anxious. They have that's the negative aspect. So they have the avoidant and then the negative thinking that we talked about. So that's the thing to think about it with those kids. I think a lot of kids that are struggling to attend school, there is, the possibility that there has been a traumatic experience that predated it. Sometimes for those kids, it's because they just haven't fit in and they felt socially excluded, and that can be traumatizing for them to the point where they go, I can't be back in that environment. And until we address that, we shouldn't send them back into that environment. So that's the challenge with some of the approaches that are like, we'll just do mindfulness and then back you go, is that it doesn't actually address that traumatic experience that child's had.
Yeah, that might happen again.
Yeah, and we'll talk.
It might be out of their control.
Yeah, exactly.
It could be bullying or cool. All right, cool. Hey, Billy, can adults truly recover from developmental trauma?
Yes, definitely. That's 100%.
That's a hard yes.
It's a hard yes. Hard yes.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, there's accessing the pathway to recovery is the challenge, and that's what we're trying to do on this podcast, but with broader advocacy as well about realising that people need, this is a lot of people. You got 50% of people in a poll saying that, and I bet 100% of those people have not had good support to ongoing therapeutic access. So, yeah, you can. There's a lot of evidence on this that, the correct therapy Trauma-focused CBT is a good example of that. Like we can talk through that if it comes up in a long later. But, yeah, there's a lot of evidence that with the right support and evidence-based strategies, you can recover from this stuff.
Okay, cool. Great. That's awesome. Billy, how do educators keep children and themselves safe when a child's trauma and dysregulation is aggressive?
Beautiful. So safety trumps everything. The challenge with these kids is that what we often make the mistake of going, I need to keep all of us safe, and the kids just going bananas. Trauma-informed practice, all the therapy we know about protective environments and stuff, is the priority is that kid being safe. So you keep everyone else safe as well, but that kid is, out of everyone in that environment, the person feeling the least safe is that kid. I guarantee it every single time. The kid who's throwing chairs, holding the knife, setting the school on fire, that is a kid, especially kids who have experienced developmental trauma that have lost, they feel like they're losing control and they feel unsafe. So what we've got to try and do is think about true inclusive practice is we are all aiming to feel safe. One of us is not feeling safe, so all of us are unsafe at the moment. How do we bring that kid in? And this is why a lot of the time, like a lot of the therapeutic interventions are aimed at what we know, someone who has control, saying you're safe because you're with me. Do you know what I mean? A big, powerful, strong, I don't mean physically, I just mean like emotionally, someone who's calm, someone who feels secure and safe and is prioritizing all of us and providing reassurance and all those things. That's often what that kid needs who's going off the deep end. The challenge is that we separate that kid out and say, we're all unsafe because of you. I need to protect the safety of all of us. And that's, kids sense that, and it further isolates them and it further shows them and reiterates they are actually unsafe. It's really difficult, but there's another question.
It's tough for a teacher that's got 23 other kids in the class.
Really tough. But I'm getting into schools a lot now, and I'm more than happy to come because it's something that's it's the best thing I love talking about is how do you practically create those environments. And Beck Harris, who is our only ever guest, we keep getting asked for guests to come on. We've only ever had one guest, but she's just released a book that, I think it's just been released, but people should check out that because that's about, trauma-informed practice in education that she's had a lot of experience about.
She's awesome. Billy, if you think you may have caused it, how can you undo the damage?
Yeah, so I think there is this narrative that exists that I don't completely agree with, that all of us will traumatize our kids. That's the destiny.
Really?
Yeah. I hear about that a little bit of people that are doing amazing work. So I'm not criticizing them, but I do worry about that. All of us we are destined to traumatize our kids. We've got a lot of questions. I can't remember if it made it in or not, but about how do you break the cycle of multi-generational trauma? And this is how you do it. Yeah. So this, I don't think so, but you can. Like I said before, the challenging thing of relationships is that our brains are so sensitive to them harming us and destroying our connections and our healthy functioning. And we might talk about how that actually happens from a sympathetic nervous system perspective later. But they can also heal us. Relationships, you think of those positive childhood experiences I talked about last time, so many of them are relationship-based. We can heal kids' self-esteem. We can heal kids' abilities to regulate, to not see threats everywhere, all of that stuff. We just do it in the way that we interact with each other. We show them over time and time and time again that you are safe here, you are secure, I am responsive, I'm following your lead. I'm meeting your needs, whatever they are. And the key is to find what the specific needs in that child is. A lot of kids who have experienced trauma will, show us that they're just completely emotionally dysregulated at the drop of a hat. Then that's what you focus on. Kids further down the line of recovery might really struggle to ever trust anyone else because they go, I'm sorted out my emotional regulation, but I'm never going to trust anyone else because of what's happened to me. And then you need to help them build that trust. And there's lots of different things that we could talk about like that. The avoidant behavior, the kid who, never thinks he's going to be good enough, thinks that the rejection is what he deserves. Finding that focus is the important thing and then work on that. It's not this universal, this is how you fix everyone who's experienced trauma.
Okay. Billy, how not to overcompensate as a parent because of your own childhood trauma?
Yeah, it's a great question, isn't it? So, yeah, we'll talk to this on the final, I haven't told you what it is yet, but the final topic of the year, our next topic, and more broadly than just outside of trauma. But this is the hardest bit of parents, like everyone who's listening, is how do I not go the other way too far? Do you know what I mean? How do I not go... My dad, just left me completely unattended and I had to navigate the entire world on my own. I'm going to make sure I don't do that. So I'm going to be on top of my kid in every single experience they have. Do you know what I mean? It's not a parent that's not trying. That's a parent that's that's the challenge, is how do we not think completely, put ourselves in our kids' shoes? That's the challenge. I do this with Evie. I look at Evie and I'm like, I think about myself as her and I've got to be careful and go, no, she is not a younger version of me. She is a completely unique, different individual and I need to meet her needs, not what my needs were when I was a kid.
Oh.
It's really, in terms of trauma, this is usual. I'll tell you a story about where I did it well and then a story very quickly that I did it poorly recently. We're overseas and we did, I convinced Annalise at like 34 weeks pregnant that we were going to do this amazing hike, classic me. And it was like, 12 Ks, kilometre up, and I'm, of course, Evie, because it's 7 a.m, we got her up in the morning, we're the first people on the trail. I'm like, this will be amazing. It's supposed to be the most stunning. People know Yosemite, it's the Mist Trail. It's called the Mist Trail because you walk next to a waterfall and you get a bit of water on you. That had like 200% snowfall that preceding winter. So it was like you're walking through the waterfall. It's freezing. And I could tell I was holding Yvette the whole way, 2 years old, carried her 90% of the walk. Right about 200 metres before the top, she was really tense the whole time and we were just like holding each other and it was freezing and I had my rain jacket around her because we didn't bring any other stuff and I'm in a T-shirt and shorts and just soaked to the bone. She's soaked to the bone, we're freezing. And about 200 metres from the top, I was like, this vista's meant to be amazing. Everyone's like, it's beautiful. She just cried out and I stopped for a split second, thought about it, and I turned around and I caught up. Annalise is like 200 metres behind me, just end of the Mist Trail. You're like steep incline, wet and slippery and everything. I'm like, this is stupid. She cried out and I turned around and went down. Now, if I'm being 100% honest, that whole walk, and Annalise will testify to this, I was like, I should have finished the last 200 metres. We're never possibly going to be back here. It's meant to be the most beautiful view in the world, all that stuff. But what I realised in hindsight was I did the right thing because I showed Yvette that I was responding to her emotional needs and separating out myself. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Now, about a week later, we were in the surf and Evie was being a little bit funny about going out when there's waves and I was like, you'll be fine. Dragged her out into the surf, huge waves coming and I'm like, there's no way I'm getting out of here for this. So I just had to hold her, went over the falls, this huge wave with Yvette in my arms, traumatised her. She only... 2 days ago, was she happy for me to go into a surf without completely losing it? Because I'd made the mistake of putting her in a situation where she was unsafe and she sensed it and it impacted her. So that's the challenge is how do you, does that make sense?
Yes.
So the Mist Trail, I was connected to her. I was sensing her. She was literally pressed against me and I went, cool, you signaled to me that you're done. Going on is the wrong thing. I need to show you and turn around regardless of missing out on this amazing view.
Gotcha.
In the surf, I was like, this will be fine, and we love the beach. I'm in the surf all the time and she's just been melting down every time at the tiniest wave we go out there. She had no problem with that until that single event happened because it traumatised her. That's traumatised her and now I've got to really gently, and for the first time 2 days ago, I got back out in the surf and she was okay with it.
God.
And that was months ago.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the challenge is, how do we, so I haven't stuffed her up because of that. It's just that now I need to gently, respond to her needs and be really gentle in how I re-expose her to that.
Yep. Okay. We're going to go through these next few.
Sorry. Yep. Go give it to me. Yep.
Is generational trauma doomed to repeat itself?
No, very quickly. No, it's not. You can, that dad, there was a highlight clip where we talked about that dad that I saw in clinic last time and you can change that. It's just that there's another question coming up. You've got to have relationships of trust with families.
Yep. Okay. How can we talk to children about traumatic events in the world right now?
Yeah. So really, we try. I mean, this will always happen. We try and make it evergreen, but it's a pretty hard thing at the moment. The most important thing is that we create opportunities for kids to demonstrate the distress that they have with us, and we hear them out. So we often want to go and talk to kids, and we say, "Hey, I need to talk to you about this awful thing that you might have heard about." We want to make sure they come to us, and we always want to make sure what their understanding, their experiences and feelings are about it. And then we kind of want to talk through it with them. Then we want to, we don't lie to them, but we try and provide that sense of safety and security and things that we can be honest about and can be truthful about. And then we try and make sure they're not overexposed to those experiences and that we counteract them with positive, secure experiences. And that's the classic. I can't remember what the guy was like, but he was like the guy in American television that used to sit in the bathtub. Is it Mr. Robinson? Tom Hanks did a movie with him.
Yeah.
But he used to say, find the helpers. And that's actually a really helpful therapeutic approach to any traumatic event, is that you try and find the focus on the positive narratives that exist within that. Yeah. So thinking about yes, this is awful, but isn't it amazing that this group is doing this?
Yep.
This story happened out of that. And that's, it's a way to counteract just the negative threat of those kind of big crises and catastrophes that occur.
Okay. Hey, how do I mindfully process my own trauma without passing it on to my children?
Yeah, great question. So separate it out, be really selfish and purposeful and say, like, I'm one of those 50% of people that have experienced this. I deserve and have every right to go and get help for this. Yeah. And it's a really big priority for my own kids and my relationship with them as well, to give me the greatest capacity to meet that demand.
Capacity. Capacity is so important.
Yeah, and it's really low if you...
It's bloody low.
You're
it's
really
low.
struggling with this stuff.
If you've got a couple
no
small
fault
kids,
of your own.
it's bloody low.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've just been reflecting on that recently. Like, my partner goes, you don't have any capacity left. And I go, oh, yeah, maybe you're right.
Yeah.
It just makes you, when you think about it, like, anyway. I don't know, mate, it's just penny drop with me, Billy, sorry. Kids with developmental trauma who don't act out, do they go under the radar?
Yeah, definitely. So especially kids with like an avoidant or so you can be hyper reactive because of trauma, threat seeking and things like that, and acting out and responding really quickly and like no threshold, no window of tolerance. But you can also have what's called learned helplessness. I don't know if you've heard of that before.
I've heard of it.
Yeah, so that original research was done on like animals in cages where there'd be a small shock that would go through the cage. And what they found is that if you have the door open the whole time and you shock them, the dog will run. But a big group of the animals, if they'd been shocked and they couldn't leave for a number of times, then if you open the door, they won't leave. They'll just sit and take the shock. And that's trauma can do that, where you just become, you just have such a low level of responsiveness because it's protective. It's like, I bury it, I don't respond, I don't acknowledge it, my whole system shuts down. And those kids are really vulnerable to that. And there's a long question that I think is right at the end.
Cool. What about vicarious trauma for especially empathetic kids from the media, violent TV shows, etc.?
Yeah, so violence in video games, TVs and stuff does not mean that, kids will then demonstrate that. And you might have experienced this, but a lot of the time it'll be the benign thing that traumatizes the kid in a cartoon or something like an owl or something like that. Do you know
Peter
what I mean?
Rabbit. Jeez.
Yeah. So you were never like, this is I shouldn't be showing my kid Peter Rabbit. But there's something that...
Mr. McGregor, the owl, mate, that stuff is petrifying for kids.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at a lot of the old movies that we watched, like cartoons growing up, and you're like, that bad person, that baddie is horrifying.
Yeah.
Like Little Mermaid or whatever it is. But it doesn't guarantee that. There's a different risk in it, is that and that's why we did 80s and 90s movies, that, what we grow up in seeing the ideal masculinity is that I solve all the world's problems through violence.
Yeah.
Because it's not a cool movie if it's like,
nope,
I'm going to try and get that guy's perspective and talk. You know what I mean? No one wants to watch Stallone.
No, mate.
Talk it through. You want to watch him just get vengeance. So there's a different level of that, but there is, but I think kids who have experienced trauma or don't have positive role models, if the only thing that they're seeing is violence and stuff like that, and especially content, which we're not going to delve into because it deserves its own topic, but, content that they shouldn't see online is really high risk for a lot of kids, especially if they've experienced trauma previously.
Okay, last short question, Billy. Goats. I loved this episode and it's given me so much to think about. Can't wait for the reflection episode. But I also urgently need to know where Nick gets his cardigans. I have loved every single one of them. Honestly.
Have you ever mentioned where you get them from? Because it is kind of funny. I just thought it'd be good to break up the shorts and longs.
Yeah, sure.
What your source is.
Honestly, I get half of my cardigans from my mum. So the green one you're actually talking about from last week's from my mother. And the other one is from my sister-in-law. She comes over wearing some pretty fresh drip and I'm like, got that in a man's size? And she's sometimes giving them to me off her back and sometimes she just buys me one.
Yeah.
100%. I don't know, girls got nice cardigans.
But they're great. And you purposely do that, I think,
I
too.
do.
But you also dress the girls beautifully too. I actually assumed that it was,
Same-
which was bad of me, that it was Henry.
sister-in-law.
Yeah, but I was like, oh, Henry dresses the girls amazingly well. And she was like, it's not, it's Nick as well.
I try.
Yeah.
It's an ongoing battle, Billy. Billy, we're into the longs. Again, people, these are the long questions, a little bit more complex, a little bit more detail, hopefully useful. They are, there's some tough ones this week. Anyway, Billy, question 1. Hello, gents. Hope this email isn't too late for the episode. I have a question about developmental trauma. How can you tell if a kid has developmental trauma? Is it possible they seem fine on the surface but might have underlying trauma that could flare up later? I often worry if my kid may have been traumatised by me. I struggle with my own mental health issues of depression and anxiety. I'm in therapy and taking antidepressants. My depression has sometimes flared up in the form of extreme anger. My kids have seen some very ugly sides of me. No direct abuse, but they have seen me shouting and breaking things, which must have been terrifying for a young child. After each episode, I apologised and tried to explain that it was not an appropriate way to deal with my emotions. But I know just an apology is often not enough. I've been trying to model better ways of dealing with my anger and strong emotions, such as calming techniques or simply leaving the room when things get heated. Things are much better lately, and my kids, now 2 and 4, seem fine on the surface. But I still worry if there's any lingering trauma due to the things I did in the past. How can I tell if there's underlying trauma? Are there signs to look for? If I do detect trauma, how can I help them work through it? And of course, I always give a big thank you for your podcast. It's been helpful in my parenting journey.
Yeah, so real honesty, and we should realise that there's so many of us that are experiencing that and think about how do we collectively help each other. So once again, it's amazing the growth that person has even shared and saying that, it used to be much worse, and I'm now learning the strategies and keep learning them, learn the strategies of how you regulate that yourself. How do you, as we've already talked about, how do you build your capacity? How do you, decrease the demands placed upon you? How do you pick what the priorities are? That stuff is really important to say, I've got too much on. I actually don't have the capacity to hold all this.
Yep.
What can I drop? The important thing is, as we talk about a lot, watch your kids. Just there's no guarantee because of that they are going to ever show any, they're at a higher risk of demonstrating that trauma in their functioning. But just watch them and see how are you showing them time and time again, as consistently as possible that they are safe and there's no risk to that. How do you make sure that they've got good relationships, they've got good trust, they have really strong, secure self-esteem, they're functioning well in school environments around other people, they've got good coping mechanisms for their own emotional regulation, all of that stuff. And if you find that they're not, help them with that, but you're role modeling that. So the sorry afterwards is fine. What you want to actually show them is when you are becoming dysregulated, be really explicit in how you hold yourself, how you find calm, why you're doing it. All that stuff. Leaving is fine if you can't do better, but I think it's really important that kids see us struggle but then succeed at regulating our own emotions. And, that's really important that I think a lot of people never saw their parents do that.
What would you say? You'd be like, Jimmy, mate, I need a minute. Or like what I'm trying to figure out.
So it's really funny. I'm really lucky that with a vet, I'm good at this. But I think it's because I'm got the biggest privilege in the world of just thinking about this all the time, seeing kids all the time. But there's other things that I really struggle with, and what I need to be doing is noticing it in myself and that sensation that I'm having and being really explicit about it and going, geez, I'm getting really frustrated at the moment. I can feel it in myself. I'm getting tense and I'm getting hot. You know, I need to just take a breath. I need to sit down. I need to just, the polyvagal theory stuff is amazing. It talks about how just simple deep breaths can help your whole system feel safe and secure again. You have to have, it's more than just that, but being really, obvious and purposeful in how we're doing that in front of our kids is really helpful, especially when it succeeds. And you're like, hey, I was getting hot there. I'm really sorry about that, but I just had to calm down and it's awesome. What do you need from me, mate? How can I help you? Hey, I reckon we're really struggling with this. What can we do to try and all calm down a bit here? You know what I mean? And obviously with the vet, I don't ask those type of questions. I look at it. Annalise and I are great because I can recognise and go, what are we trying to help her with? What are we trying to help her succeed? And she'll get annoyed and she'll throw stuff like, she gets annoyed when she can't get something in and just hurls it. And I'm like, that's fine. Let's come back to calm. And then I'll show you how to succeed at that Lego, putting that pencil in, doing that thing. And that's my role, is that validating that experience that she's having, understanding it, but going, here's how to succeed at what you were trying to achieve. That's really important, but you role model that. So does that make sense? I don't know if you can think about it, but if you get frustrated with something that's happening in life or with the girls, it's really important that we're aware that in those moments, we are role modeling to our kids what our coping mechanisms are and how we're constantly working on it, but not perfectly.
Yeah, good, because I've got one I do all the time. I've just reflected on when you were saying, I'm going to have to fix it.
Well, you just want to work on it. You can't, I don't think anyone has ever really perfectly nailed this stuff. But think about, hey, I'm really avoidant. I just avoid all that and I'm constantly leaving, and the girls are seeing that every time something gets tough for me, I'm gone.
Yeah.
That's fine. But how do I sometimes go at a lower level? Sorry, Daddy's just getting really frustrated because of this. But he realises that it's a bit silly. So I'm just kind of realising it's okay to get angry, but I probably shouldn't, let it get to me so much. So I do this, whatever it is. That's what co-regulation starts with self-regulation. That's how kids learn it. The first step is actually us finding calm.
Cool. Question 2, Billy. Hi, Nick and Billy. I've recently become a fan since hearing Dr. Billy on Hamish Blake's podcast, and I'm binging all the episodes. You guys are both amazing. In regards to trauma, my husband, when he was a 5-year-old, became sick with leukemia and was treated for about 2 years. During that time, his parents also became divorced. He has never seen a therapist or confronted his parents about the early life experience. He doesn't think it's affected him and has always maintained an extremely positive, grateful outlook of life, which can be quite irritating, to be honest. My husband and I now have 2 kids, 4-year-old and 18-month-old daughter. I'm curious to know, can his trauma affect our children in any way? My concern is that his positive outlook often makes him dismiss negative feelings, emotions of our 4-year-old, and is expressing, I'm cranky, I'm sad, etc. I always ask my 4-year-old why he's feeling a certain way, and we can have a chat about it so he knows I'm there. But my husband will tend to just say, you're okay, and not seem to take the feeling seriously. Love your work. Thanks again.
Thoughts?
Yeah. I think you say this often is like you've got to validate the experience the kid's having as opposed to saying, you're fine, which I do 50% of the time.
Yeah, great. That's amazing. It's probably more than I do. But yeah, that risk in it's okay or you're okay can be like, and it's also like we've got to go to their needs, not go, well, I'm fine.
Yeah, but it's also, I know that father's position. No, you do too. But it's like if you tell them they're fine, sometimes they're actually fine in that moment, or you distract them. It's like a power of distraction. I know it's not the right thing to do, but
no, it's not the wrong thing to do.
Like I do it with my youngest all the time. I just distract her. I'm like,
But the analogy, I don't know if I've talked about it on the podcast, but the kid trips on the playground. The first thing they do before they react is look to you, don't they?
Yeah.
Now, if you're always distressed and you always go, oh my God, that kid is going to, every time they fall down, it's a catastrophe.
Mate, we actively say to like close friends as well, not just my partner. I'll be like, don't look. He's just falling on his face. And we look up. We go, all good, mate? I know it's not the right thing to do, but it's like I want them to keep playing and having a good time.
No, but yes, I think that's fine. The problem is if the kid's falling over 10 times a day and you're like, you're okay, they're clearly not okay. They're really struggling with the simple act of X, walking, monkey bars, whatever. But the psychological bit is we need to think about it the same. Oh, you're a bit distressed. I'm going to show you that everything's all right and how I act and how you say it can be okay as well. But it's kids that are really struggling. That's where the vulnerability is, and always kind of going, you're fine. The kid who's constantly
I definitely don't say they're fine. I've not learnt that, but I just look and go, oh, all good, mate. Like, all good. And then if they're not, I'm like, oh, okay, come here, hun.
Yeah, exactly.
But like, I don't go, you're fine, dust it off.
Yeah, that's the risk, is that
But
when
am I
they're
negligent? Am I being negligent?
No, because the other thing that you're doing is you're watching them. So
I'm
you're letting
watching
them lead. So if they go, I'm actually not, I'm not okay, and they melt down, you're in there. I've seen you do it.
Yeah, I will. I'll do that.
Yeah.
But I won't, I'll look them out of the corner of my eye because I don't want to be like.
Yeah, you're watching them, and that's actually what some kids really need. They need someone that's not jumping up and down distressed every time they fall over. So, it's great. And the beautiful thing about that's an amazing balance of two parents. One who's come through significant adversity really well and is like, the world is good, it's safe, everything's okay. And a parent who's like maybe more sensitive to the kid might be struggling, and they'll be in that sweet spot beautifully.
Beautiful. Question 3, Billy. Hi, Billy and Nick. As a professional working with families, I loved the episode, particularly how you approach the issue of smacking with parents with a focus on trust. Issue of smacking with parents with a focus on trust. Unconditional positive regard and showing another way. Any tips for professionals working with kids showing effects of developmental trauma, like acting out, difficulty concentrating, trouble with peers, when the adults around them consider it to be a problem with the kid that needs diagnosing and fixing through individual therapy? How do you help parents to feel safe disclosing exposure to adverse childhood experiences to get more buy-in from parents and teachers to understand and focus on protective factors? Thanks as always.
Yeah, amazing. It's just so timely, and I don't know if I'm just putting this out in the world, but yeah, I'm speaking at a conference tomorrow to developmental pediatricians about this. I spoke at a primary school conference last Wednesday about this, and on the coming Monday, I'm speaking to early childhood educators about this. It's really important that us as professionals that have technical expertise, me in child development, mental health, educators in, how kids learn and all those processes, understand that there is also what's called relational expertise. And that's a completely different thing. And it is an expertise. It's not something, that's just a touchy-feely thing. But you have to make sure that you create spaces where you acknowledge that this is a shared space, a sharing of power, a sharing of authority, making sure that you build trust and safe places for conversations with families, especially those that they themselves have had negative experiences with services, developmental trauma themselves. It's really important. And a lot of what we do is built in the way that everything we do before those tough conversations. If the first time or the only time you go to a family is because you're going to say, hey, your kid's really messing up or everything, then that's not a trusting, protective relationship. No. You need to invest in every family in the community and say, I'm investing in all of you because there might be a day where I have to come and have a tough conversation.
Yep.
And I want you to know I'm genuinely here for you and that we'll figure it out together, and this is a safe place for you because I've had 100 conversations with you before, and I've had this, like, one beautiful thing in the evidence is how important quiet enthusiasm is. So I have faith that your kid is amazing and is going to be good if we put all the right support around.
Quiet enthusiasm? What's that?
Yeah. So it's not jumping up and down going, Nick's the best kid I've ever met, but just being like, yeah, there's something about Nick that I really think is amazing, very strengths-based. These are all the things that are good about him, all that stuff. And then you can go, but I reckon he's like struggling a little bit in his relationships. What do you reckon? How do you think he's going? Also, if they've had any fracturing, a really important thing is to acknowledge it and say, you've had a crap experience at another school. That clinician didn't help you last time. Whatever, I know that you had child protection involved. What can I do and what can we do together to try and heal that? It's really important, that we think about that stuff, because so many families miss out, don't feel safe bringing up stuff. They're really hostile when we come into these conversations because we're not purposefully going into it like that. But I could do a whole talk on that. People often ask about how you can help, but reach out, because if you're in a corporation that wants to do PD, psychoeducation will come and do it. I really love doing that stuff with professionals. That really helps us kind of resource this and spread the word, and it's really valuable. But yeah, I'm doing 3 in a fortnight just on relational practice.
Beautiful. Billy, I've recently discovered your podcast and have been playing catch up, but couldn't wait to listen to this week's episode. I really want to thank you both for sharing all your knowledge and wisdom with your listeners like me, who at the end of the day really just want to raise happy, kind and emotionally healthy kids. I have a question about your most recent episode. At 16 years old, so coming up on 14 years ago, I tragically lost my older brother, who was 23 at the time, in a pretty traumatic accident which involved my other brother being the driver of the vehicle that in turn resulted in my brother's death. This was a freak accident and honestly a perfect example of young people thinking they're invincible. As you can imagine, this was very sudden and unexpected. There are many details from that have had a lasting, very traumatic impact on me to this day. The sound my mother made when they brought his dead body through the door for the first time, my dad picking me up from my friend's house with the victim's support person and telling me in the back seat that my brother wasn't coming home, the mortician coming in to reapply cosmetics. Also lots of negative implications which I believe stem from this trauma. My brother that was driving the car, who never had an issue with drug abuse or trouble with the law, had a lengthy addiction with meth which ended him in very hot water and ultimately in prison. Sorry about the lengthy explanation, but I'm trying to paint a picture that you can understand. My question is it possible for sudden trauma such as this to affect memory loss and brain development? I'm now 30 years old and have an almost 4-year-old and an 18-month-old, and I'm constantly finding myself forgetting really simple everyday things like taking nappies when we head out for the day, something a mum of 2 should be really good at. I also have lots of blank spots in memory from around the time he passed away to approximately when my oldest was born, and almost feel like I wasn't really there for most of it. I hope that all makes sense. Thank you both again for all you do. You're changing the world.
Yeah, it's a hard one, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a tough one.
So, yeah, I mean, one of the hard things was that there was, this was, everyone is the hardest one, but this is by far the hardest one because there were so many questions that I just can't have read out. You couldn't read them. I made sure you didn't read them because they are just so traumatizing. These awful stories that have happened to people, and I'll find a way in future to address them. But this one was on that edge of this is an awful thing that this person has experienced that is almost as bad as developmental trauma can get as a kid, losing a loved one, and you can see the devastating impact it's had on the brother. This is what we know is a lot of these kids that are really struggling in the community have experienced this trauma. Nothing was going on. Traumatic events happen and they become dysfunctional. Substance abuse, so much of it is a coping mechanism. It is, I cannot deal with this cognitive load of what has happened to me. It's traumatizing. My whole body viscerally is in flight mode the entire time. I'm frightened. I never get out of that state. The only thing I can do is numb it out with substances, with alcohol, whatever. And if we don't meet that need, these kids will that's their future that it's going to be. Her question is a really good one. Yes, we know that memory loss is really common in kids that have experienced it, adults as a coping mechanism. I cannot deal with that, so I bury it. It is not an active thing that they're doing. It is their brain's response to something that has burnt them and said, I can't address this. I can't meet this need. Also, what we know is that kids who have experienced significant trauma lose their cognitive capacity. So this mum's talking about that. I'm really forgetful. I'm really struggling with certain things. How do we, understand that and meet their basic, emotional, physiological needs of safety, regulation, calming, all those things, because otherwise it impacts. We had a lot of educators sending in we've got traumatized kids in our community. They're really struggling with their academic learning. What do? You drop the requirement of their academic learning being the focus until you have addressed that need. Otherwise, these kids will become these parents that really struggle with memory, focusing, all this stuff. They've missed a lot of things. Like, it's a really important thing. So definitely, and this mum, like the brother, needs to have a therapeutic community relationship, support. You know, it all needs to come around them. And, you know, we can do this. It's not some impossible dream. It's just that the system is so broken, and I can say that on this podcast without, you know, anything negative. But, you know, we need to do better than this, and our entire community will benefit from it.
Yeah. Tough question. Billy, question 5. Nick and Billy, thank you for the episode on developmental trauma. This episode hit home. Our family is made up of 2 grown-up children and 2 younger boys. We are so grateful our family is formed through an irregular method. My wife and I were foster parents when, one day, we received a call to look after the 2-day-old baby. 12 months later, we received another call to look after his baby brother. Then, after 2 years, we could adopt 2 boys. Wow. What we are finding is that both boys suffer developmental trauma. The older boy suffers trauma as a result of domestic violence within the womb. He suffers from high anxiety and struggles walking into shopping centres. He struggled in kindergarten and year 1 during COVID. His former high school struggled to manage his high anxiety and desperate emotion to lash out. He's had to move to a school with better support. He's now 9 years old. He constantly, on a daily basis, lashes out at his younger brother and is often violent to his mother, both physically and verbally. The younger boy spent the first 7 weeks of his life in the care of his birth mother, where he was severely neglected. He was malnourished and often left alone. He now suffers from low esteem and usually shows no emotion. He has high expectations of himself and lashes out if simple mistakes are made. Sometimes a simple error in maths will trigger his meltdown. He's doing very well in school and sitting about 2 years ahead of his grade level, year 2, for maths. He can read well for his age and is about 1 year ahead of his peers in this area. We've gone through 2 paediatricians. The first one ignored the complexities. We were so lucky we found a paediatrician who listened. Both boys have been prescribed Ritalin for ADHD and Risperidone for anxiety and anger. The medication has assisted dramatically at school. But now we're trying to deal with handling stress and social situations. We've been referred to paediatrician and psychologists, but with a huge waiting list, it's hard to get in. It has been a 12-month waiting list and no sign until February 2024. They're beautiful boys, but the response to everyday situations have taken the toll on my wife and me. My wife and I have both been medicated for depression. We are coping, but it is challenging. My upbringing is old school, yelling and smacking. I try hard not to act similarly to my father, but I struggle with dealing with stress and sometimes resort to my father's ways. Finally, my question is, how can I learn to be a better dad and cope with high stress level? I've tried mindfulness and also tried a psychologist. However, the psychologist had no experience with what I was dealing with. How do I find a psychologist that understands my situation to help me be a better dad? Any advice is greatly appreciated. Yeah, wow.
Amazing, isn't it? It's just those people, sometimes I think that I'm doing something good in the world, and then you hear those stories and you go, oh my God, There's a lady I know well who lives in the area that I met at the dog park, and I just continued to pester her, and she finally gave in, and she's been a short-term foster carer, so kids that really early on need to leave certain environments and come, and she's fostered over 70 babies. Just amazing.
What age ranges?
So all little babies. So, and now I finally got under her skin because she drops knitted, crocheted outfits out for the 2 kids now. Just knocks on the door. Not really a people person or anything, but she's just amazing. And I just constantly, every time she was rolling her eyes, every time she saw me walk over for a chat. But amazing, amazing stuff. So these people are phenomenal. So let's talk to the question.
70 babies.
Yeah, she's amazing.
This person. Let's focus on this person.
Yeah, so the important bit is like how much this person needs to be reinforced, because there's not many people in the world that can do what those parents are doing, like those foster carers that have just asked that question. And how do we really put in good support around them? So, I would say to anyone who asks me about, a psychologist, is that there is not one psychologist who's perfect for everyone. And I ask kids a lot for this. I'm like, I just need you to give them a chance, but it might not be the first one that you meet that is the right one. But I'll stay involved until we find the right one. But it's really important we do find the right one for a lot of people, including those parents, because the medication for both the kids and the parents will not be the complete solution. So there's got to be what we talk about often for skill development. There's got to be skill development for the parents in the really challenging behaviours that they're seeing in these kids, which are not because of any strategy that they're not using, but because of the developmental trauma those kids have experienced. The first one in the womb, that means, and what we understand now, is that there is this big hormonal stress surge that occurs for these little babies, and then they come out just really dysregulated and hypervigilant and really sensory vulnerable to like stimulation and all those things. And then we need to do the same with the kids. So we need to understand. And the beautiful thing about this question is we hear the first kid, but especially the second kid, we hear where the vulnerability is, don't we? We hear fragile self-esteem. He's really hard on himself whenever he fails. The challenge is that what we hear in that kid is he'll constantly be hearing how he's ahead at certain things. And so a lot of his self-esteem is probably tied to it. Kids with developmental trauma, they see threats everywhere, and he's constantly seeing a threat probably to that sense of self. I'm the smart one. That's the thing I've got going for me. Every time I fail at something academically, it's a threat that that's wrong, and then I completely lose my suit of armor. So what we need to think about is how do we, without sacrificing that, find multiple strengths for that kid? How do we build the capacity of these parents to hold that regulation and give them response, and give them also just opportunities to, get rest and rejuvenate and all those things. You cannot do this on your own. The best foster parents in the world cannot do this on their own. They need to have the village around them. And as the village, we have a greatest responsibility with these either families that are still with these kids or when they're in foster homes. How do we support them? Because one of my colleagues is like leading the country on this, and she's amazing. And these kids are chronically not having their needs met. That we are just completely under supporting them, and it's getting worse. So this is a really important thing that we need to understand and go, what are the specific needs of this kid? And the perfect example, like I often talk about this, because mindfulness can be amazing. Monash guys in Melbourne have done an amazing thing with mindfulness. It is not the panacea to everything. And that's the problem, is that people go, well, mindfulness will sort it out. But actually, that kid doesn't need mindfulness, and it sounds like that parent doesn't need mindfulness.
Yeah.
So that's, what are the specific needs, and we hear in the second kid what they are.
Yeah.
Sorry, heavy questions.
Yeah, no, heavy questions. Cool. Question 6, Billy. Thank you so much for the pod. I've been listening for a long time, and I've learnt so much from both of you. Of all the episodes I've listened to, this week's ep really hit home for me. I particularly resonated with the part about adverse childhood experiences and how they can cause developmental trauma. My partner and I have a beautiful 1-year-old baby boy who we just adore, and while the world of parenting is fairly new to us, we are loving every minute. My partner also unfortunately lives with some fairly complicated and what at times has been debilitating mental illness. It's something they've been dealing with for a few years now after experiencing some awful trauma through their work and unfortunately developing PTSD. Although my partner is managing well compared to when they originally became unwell, and we are lucky enough to be in a position to access some really amazing professional support, we do live knowing that symptoms could flare up from time to time. I have a basic understanding of ACEs.
Adverse childhood experiences.
Okay. And I can see how mental illness in the home would affect kids and I worry that this could cause some degree of developmental trauma for our son, despite the fact it is a safe and loving home. It's really hard not to feel incredibly guilty that our son already has an ACE score when he is still so young and might experience developmental trauma because of an illness that my partner works so hard to manage, but is a reality for us and may unfortunately be part of our lives for a while. I know how common mental illness is, particularly in Australia, so I can imagine this might be an experience for lots of families. I also know that there can be so much stigma and judgment around mental illness, and my partner and I have both felt this even more intensely in the context of being parents, and we worry a lot about our son experiencing this as he gets older. My question is, what is the best way to mitigate the impacts of this adverse childhood experience for our son, given this illness might be around a while? And what can we do better as a society to help kids with parents live with mental illnesses and protect them from experiencing developmental trauma? Thanks again, guys. I absolutely love the pod and appreciate that you tackle some heavy topics with such knowledge, kindness and understanding. You'll be helping so many parents and kids. Keep up the amazing work.
Yeah. So it is. It's a really great demonstration of like the guilt that we feel when our kids have adverse childhood experiences that are not our fault, but we are part of it. And I have, I'm sure I've had a few times in my life where I've met criteria for a mental illness and they, I can't imagine, I'm lucky that it hasn't happened on my parenting journey, but I know that, relapses of that are really common and I might have to face that. I don't think that mental illness or even adverse childhood experiences guarantee that, developmental trauma will exist. We have to remember that. We also know, the ACE score that they talk about, we know that, 1 in 5 children in Australia has 3 or more adverse childhood experiences in their history. That's huge when you think about it. That's kind of all the things we talked about, the neglect, abuse, household dysfunction. Gotcha. Once again, though, those kids are not guaranteed to have developmental trauma, mental illness, whatsoever, because what we talked about is the protective antidotes that we can do. And what we have to try and do, those of us that are struggling with this stuff, is think about what is achievable action. So sometimes we get really lost in that kind of hopelessness. There's nothing that I can do. But what are your strengths as a parent? And I know that these guys will have strengths that can try and protect from that. And it might be, I think what I'm really good at is making sure that I create a safe space where our kids can come to us and know that we'll always be there, we'll always be responsive, we'll always be what we talked about, flexible to their needs and all that stuff. There will be times where my own or my partner's own mental illness can overwhelm us. But what I can work on is the other stuff. The societal question is like, I'm trying to do this with kids, but we just need to get better at this. Like, I worry that there's a lot of tokenistic kind of mental health stuff that's happening in the community that isn't genuinely pushing back against the stigma. We know a lot of people with even, things like psychosis, we've got such a long way to go before we understand that we have no stigma like we talk about for people who have glasses or who have asthma. And people with mental illness are as much to blame for their mental illness as kids with asthma or an allergy. And that's so they should be treated exactly the same way. And we should be thinking about how does the community meet their needs, just like, all those of us that have other medical stuff going on that's not mental illness. So I think it's about how do we just demand and expect that services will meet our needs as a community, and that's their responsibility. Like, that's what we should be expecting for obviously our kids, but all the adults in the community. But I'm just particularly interested in parents because it's this stuff. Otherwise, it just keeps cycling. But that's my response to that. Is that how do we proactively seek out the actions that can be helpful for the kids in our care, and try and find the energy to place into that as we also meet our own mental health needs.
Okay, cool. Question 7, Billy. Hi, Nick and Billy. Long-time listener and not even a parent yet. I started listening to your podcast before because of my own developmental trauma to try and ensure I can be the best possible parent to my future kids. I also have a few kids in my life who I love being a non-parental support to, and it always makes me feel special to know how important we can be in these kids' lives. A few nights ago, I was at a dinner with my partner's friends, who is a partner to an 18... Sorry, I'll start that again, sorry. A few nights ago, I was at a dinner with my partner's friends, who are parents to an 18-month-old daughter. In the midst of an open conversation about emotional challenges, I mentioned that sometimes my past developmental trauma can lead to me to becoming dysregulated in conflicts with my partner that bring up old attachment wounds. My partner and I have been working through these challenges together, and he has been very supportive in learning how to best support me in these moments, especially as I have high-functioning autism and ADHD, while he is neurotypical. Working through this stuff has made us a lot stronger, and consequently, we have these conflicts less and less. As of recently, we are trying to get pregnant with our first child. However, at this dinner, his friend asked me how I expected to be able to be a parent if I get dysregulated and have these issues. I don't know how to respond to the implication that because of the struggles I experienced due to my own past developmental trauma, as well as a neurospicy brain, that this would make me less of a parent. Is there a relationship between developmental trauma and neurodivergence? And is there any evidence that people with developmental trauma are less capable of being good parents themselves? I'd love to hear your input on this topic, and I'll be listening to you both until your kids have all grown up. Please never stop helping the world with what you do.
What do you think?
Oh, that's really tough. I feel sorry for that person that they experienced that, and it just is, yeah, I don't have any, you're going to tell us the answer, right? But I just, my empathy's through the roof for that person. That's a really tough thing to deal with.
Yeah. So
it's the inference from the other person.
Of course. Yeah, that's why that made the cut, because it's so cutting. Like, it's just awful for that person to have experienced that, especially a person who's listening to a parenting podcast before they have kids so they can be the best parent they can be.
I know.
Jesus.
Yeah.
Like, blows my mind, people.
I know. I sort of laughed at the start. I was laughing. I realised a lot of people listen to this just because they've got younger kids in their lives through other means. But I was like, it's so nice to hear.
So I think I'm a better parent because of the developmental trauma that I've experienced. I 100% believe that.
What makes you more self-aware, self-reflective?
Makes me more self-aware. I have, I think that the challenge in a lot of this stuff is lived experience is important and really powerful. It's just got to be combined really purposefully with kind of evidence-based and all of that stuff. And I think that, I honestly, like, I'm not saying that I wouldn't go back and change it, but I think I'm a better parent. I think I'm a better person because of the mental illness that I've gone through, and had to go. I've seen probably 5 therapists. I've been medicated. I think that it gives me an insight into the people around me that also struggle with that, but also, being really sensitive to the needs of my kids. I think neurodiversity is the same. I don't think it is a deficit or means that you'll be a worse parent. And I think often you have greater insight and empathy into the experience of kids, especially those who are vulnerable to experiencing trauma, mental illness, neurodiversity, that stuff. So I think that that's wrong. And, that's the evidence shows us this as well. You are not committing developmental trauma. Your kids, you're not committing them to developmental trauma futures purely because you have mental illness or things like that. If that was the truth, most of us would be doomed, because most of us have had experiences either directly or with loved ones and partners of mental illness. So yeah, it's flat out wrong. I'm really sorry that person experienced that. You, by the sounds of it, will be a phenomenal parent because you're already listening to a parenting podcast well before. And it's amazing. My hat goes off to you, because there was no way before I had kids that I was listening. I don't listen to any other content as it is, but I live in this. So
yeah, awesome. Yes, and good luck. I'm hoping maybe they'll message us if they fall pregnant.
We'd love to hear that, actually.
Love to hear that. Hey there, Nick and Billy. My 3-year-old son, I always start, got this, sorry. Just to the listeners, I have this default starting bubbly voice to questions for every episode, and I realise today is not
Beautiful,
that.
mate. I'm often coming flat, and you're.
But I just
you often
start
bring
with,
the energy.
then I go, oh, jeez, I'm sorry. I don't mean to start like that. I don't remember the questions when I reread them.
okay.
Sorry. My 3-year-old son is an only child, so sorry, let me start again. Hey there, Billy and Nick. My 3-year-old son is an only child, so I make a real effort to let him hang out with neighbourhood children. There are these 2 boys, 4 and 6, who my son loves spending time with, and they make me incredibly nervous. We were all walking home from the playground one day. I was holding my son, and the older boy said, "Wouldn't it be funny if we dropped your son on the ground and killed him?" And more recently, the younger boy held a Nerf gun to my head and said, "Do you have any last words for your son before you die?" These are just 2 examples, but it is a pretty constant stream of violent rhetoric from these 2 boys. I've never really had a conversation with their parents, and the one interaction I had with their dad, I thought he was going to punch me. With that said, they don't show any signs of physical abuse as far as I can tell, and honestly, I just haven't spent a lot of time around kids, so I don't know if these are perfectly normal things to say when you find out death is a thing and you're trying to process it. I would love to be a non-parental adult figure who takes an interest in their life, but the things they say consistently cripple me with anxiety. Any advice on how to handle a conversation with them, or should I bring it up with their teachers? Thanks for everything you do.
Thoughts?
Oh, God, I don't know. I haven't had to deal with anything close to that. I don't know. Oh, I'd react.
What would you do?
Oh, I'd probably give him a chat.
No, how are you going to finish that?
No, like give him a... No, I was going to say like a...
Probably give him a...
No, not like a... No. I was thinking more like a good stern talking to. But then I'm like, you're probably like, after 72 episodes, you give these 2 kids a good stern talking to. Is that what you do, Nick?
Smack.
What if I... No, I wasn't going to give him a smack.
No.
Yeah, you're probably looking at me going, I've given you all these tools and you lead with a good stern talking to.
No, I actually don't think it's wrong. I was more like... I think your reaction to it shows that this is not someone who's like, is this normal? Is this?
No.
So no, like it's not. And you know, my potential like smoke detectors going off with those kids, but I'll obviously never meet them. But I'm worried about those kids. But what we're actually trying to think about is this parent's perspective.
Okay.
So
what are they going to do?
So their anxiety does not be trumped by the needs of those kids. So when they say I'm crippled by anxiety every time I'm around them, don't force yourself to take responsibility for these kids having better guidance than they're currently getting.
Gotcha.
The spider sensors going off with, I thought the dad was going to punch me in the face. I don't know if this is a mum or a dad, but either way, that is obviously, you know, a red flag for hostility in the parent. And that's not normal either, to be worried that, you know, another adult's about to assault you because of that. So there's 2 things. There's the parent and the child that are experiencing this and protecting them, and then there's what this person amazingly asks is like, you know, how can I be a positive non-parental figure in these kids' lives? So I think, you know, there's a bit in both those camps in a potential strategy, which is what you talk about, the stern talking to, but actually connecting with these kids and being like, hey, that makes me worry. I don't like hearing about that stuff. Like that makes me worry. This is my son who I love. I don't, you know, I get really scared when you say things like that, or that really upsets me, and then direct them to more appropriate play and conversation and then reinforce it. That's the pathway. That's the like predictability, safety, find the strengths in those kids, give them opportunities and pathways to succeed in interacting in a positive way that doesn't have threat, doesn't have violence, doesn't have like, what are your last words? What if we drop your kid and he dies? Like, you know, acknowledge that they've said that, connect with them, try and understand where it's coming from, guide them and put up a barrier that says that's not appropriate because of this reason. It makes me scared. It makes me whatever. It makes me worry. It makes me sad. And then find them a pathway to recovery and then more appropriate behaviours, scaffold it, all that stuff. That's if you have the capacity. If you go into that interaction with those kids or that parent and you're just humming with anxiety, don't ask that of yourself.
Yep.
speak to the school as they recommend and say, hey, I'm just a bit worried. Can I do anything to help these kids? Like, there's just been this language coming up. And, you just might find that they go, hey, we didn't know about that. Or, oh, yeah, look, we've got a strategy. You could be a part of it. This is the response that the family has found helpful. This is what we're working on at school. It'd be really great if you could do it too. And trying to give them opportunities to have successful, more appropriate interactions and friendships and conversations.
Yeah. It's a much better pathway than what I'd suggested. So
No, but that's just me going deeper into your talking to me.
Well, yeah, like I'd have unpacked it with them. Like, boys, whoa, what do you mean?
Yeah, exactly.
That's how
I know that's what you would have done. Yeah,
I wouldn't have been like, oh.
No,
well.
I know, but that's what you would have done. You would have connected with them, shown why that's not appropriate.
I'm not good at articulating, but I actually would have connected with
Yeah,
them.
I know you would have.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're amazing.
No, stop.
Not just with the girls, you're amazing with everyone in the community that has kids.
Hey, Nick and Billy, love the podcast. Oh, sorry. Hey, Nick and Billy, love the podcast and use it for reference, both for my kids and my work in a high school. I'm currently working with a student who has PTSD, a very complicated domestic violence family situation, ADHD, and is gifted. Some days she is dysregulated. Some days she's so dysregulated that she will stare at her laptop in class and not even acknowledge other people, including the teacher. She's become violent before, both at home and in school scenarios. Her paediatrician and psychologist have talked with the school and said it's her safe place and that her well-being is more important than her academics. It's good. Sorry. Her parents are very difficult to deal with and haven't proved helpful. How do we as teachers, not trained in the area of trauma, help this student? A gentle approach works sometimes, but other times we feel we have to just leave her in the classroom. She doesn't usually disturb other students, but zoned out in front of her. She doesn't usually disturb other students, but zoned out in front of her screen. Showing interest in her has always been an approach, but it is so hard that she's unpredictable and we want to avoid unsafe situations in the classroom for ourselves and students. We just feel out of our depth. Any advice?
Yeah, definitely. So she's dissociating. She's her body and her brain and her feelings, that's her coping mechanism. She just shuts down.
Right.
So a lot of kids will do this, and that's what I suspect she's doing. Obviously, I'm basing it off a few sentences, but yeah, really common that we see that, and really amazing that the educators are in tune with that, because it speaks to one of the shorts an hour ago that was, kids flying under the radar, and this kid is vulnerable to flying under the radar because they're like, oh, she's just daydreaming, or she's got ADHD, she can't focus. But kids who have trauma will often, and adults unfortunately as well, will just shut out their interaction with the world because that's how they can make sure that they're safe. And it's a coping mechanism, and it's a really dysfunctional one, but we see that a lot. The comment from the paediatrician is really helpful. This is the safe space. Yeah. It just needs to have a bit more strategy in it. So strategy and how do you implement that strategy? And those are two different things. The strategy is consistency is really important in trauma-informed environments, and making sure consistent, predictable responses, environments, just the way that we set up. You see, this is the week, it's predictable, this is how it's going to be, these are your relationships, these are what we're asking of you, this is how we're going to respond to you. Yep. All of that consistency, because then her threat level drops. Yep. Because she goes, I know what's going to happen. Then you try and have a strengths-based approach that what we talked about in the positive childhood experiences, but explicitly looks at what are her strengths and interests and how do we show her that she's an active, important participant in this, and our school community is less than if she's not a part of it. It's really important. Every single kid in the school has that. People might be listening to that go, that's crazy. That's how you protect everyone, especially that kid. And, this child, like a lot of people, it won't be, we'll do one thing and in a week she'll be better. But it's about doing it consistently for weeks, sometimes months, until you see that positive benefit. But going to that, try as much as you can to build a safe conversation and relationship with the parents. That is at risk at the moment based on what they've said, but try and find common ground with them, try and connect with them, because the best thing you might do is find what helps her and help it transition into the home environment as well. So that's
Long
often
road,
the
Billy?
consistency. Yeah, long road, but really important one. Like often the best thing that schools do is they figure out how to tap in and connect with these kids and what strategies work for them, and they give them to the parents. Because you've got to remember, like we get a lot of educators that send in and go, Billy, I can do this stuff at home. How come I can't do it? I can do this stuff at school, sorry. How come I can't do it at home? And home is way harder.
Home's harder.
All families that have kids that are struggling emotionally or behaviourally know that. Often that's the safe space as well. They come home and they just dysregulate.
Yeah.
So that's really important. The final thing, like reach out to me, other people. There's a lot of us that love going into schools and doing this stuff really deeply as well, and going really deep into that. And I, do that a lot. And there's a lot of us that love that. You shouldn't feel alone as educators in school communities, because it shouldn't be your sole responsibility. You are becoming the final and most important community hub. We're losing a lot of our old traditional, totems or whatever of like, this is where we all collectively meet, and there's a lot of weight being put on schools, but they shouldn't hold it all on their own.
Okay, cool. 2 questions to go, Billy. On trauma, 3 months ago, I left an abusive marriage, packed up my 2 sets of twins and left. The tipping point was that my big twins, 6, was looking down the barrel of an ADHD diagnosis, but I never felt like this was the whole story. It is very clear now that she was living in fight or flight, and she has improved significantly since I have left. Her twin brother, who is autistic, has also calmed down colossally. He went from saying he would kill himself if I left him with his dad to happily separating from me and a lot less ASD meltdowns. 2 things. How do I help my kids heal from the trauma that they lived in for so long? And how do I mitigate the trauma that comes from the inevitable ongoing contact with their dad? We're heading to family court. There are abuse charges and CPS reports plenty. They see him one night a fortnight and they come back a wreck. You talk about both parents being necessary, but I see active harm being caused to their emotional well-being.
Yeah, so there's been a couple of times where people sent stuff in and said, Billy said this. I must have said to parents necessary, so I apologise. That is wrong. I've met lots of kids that have no parent, like the foster ones we just talked about. They're not their biological parents and they're amazing caregivers. I see lots of kids that it's a single grandparent or a single person that's holding that kid, and those kids are thriving. So no. And I personally get a bit fired up thinking about that mum's story, because I went through the CPS, as Child Protection Services, and I went through the courts. I went through the family courts. I hope they're better than they are now, because I had words being put in my mouth, and like as a little kid it was just really traumatizing. So awful stuff. Amazing to hear that parent has found safety, and that's the most important thing, is that a lot of kids that live in dysfunctional households, people will say we need to stay together because we need to, or married or something like that. But if you stay in an unsafe environment, it is one of the most traumatic experiences that a kid can have. Because what we need to remember is a lot of kids who have experienced trauma have actually lost a sense of control. A sense of control, of safety, a control over their own body. Every time I go into this environment, I get gut-wrenching anxiety, I get stressed, I look for threats everywhere. And we're seeing those kids were sensing that initially, threats about self-harm or whatever is really common flares that kids will send up saying, I'm feeling a loss of control and I'm trying to find that control again. But this parent has done an amazing thing in going through a really awful thing to try and find a more safe and secure environment for their kids. I see lots of kids in clinic where they will go, and we had overwhelmingly the most common questions that we got this time were about divorce. And, this parent, often the dad, is doing something awful and something terrible, and these kids come back a wreck, or they're really traumatized by being there and stuff. And it is really hard. I see that in clinic a lot. And I think it goes back to that, what we talked about, those kids that are experiencing trauma in the world and things like that. How can we make sure that we create avenues for them to come and talk to us? How can we say some things are out of my control? These are all the things that are in my control. How can we make sure that we put a lot of emphasis on services that are paid to protect kids and look after families and stuff to do it. And I think that's really important. The system is a broken one. I work with amazing people in child protection that have their hands tied all the time. But I think, there's also a responsibility to understand that dad and often these parents that are dysfunctional and are having a negative experience on their kids' lives were kids. And this is where we don't break the cycle of multi-generational trauma, because we just don't meet their needs, and then they become parents that will... There's awful research about this that shows that, people who have experienced abuse as kids are more likely to go on and be abused as adults. It's horrifying, isn't it? You would think that their experience as kids would mean that they are hypervigilant, but what they've learned is that is how they should be treated, and that is what's normal behaviour. And so that's why this is probably the most important topic we've covered. And it's really funny, we're running really long, but I'm like, there's so many things I want to say that I haven't yet, because I'm, and we'll have to have another shot at this down the line because it's really important. But my hat goes off to these parents that do this. You are... Yeah, and I'm sorry if I ever said that. Thank God my parents separated. And I think there's a lot of people out there that probably have that similar childhood experience that they go, that was a really dysfunctional relationship, household, whatever. So, yeah.
Just a follow-up question. Do you have much to do with Child Protective Services or have had?
Yeah, I would see.
Working with?
Yeah, definitely. I see kids every day that have active child protection involvement. 1 in 32 kids in Australia has active child protection involvement. 1 in 32. Active, not looking into it. It's
1 in 32.
Yes, every classroom's probably got a kid that's got child protection involved.
Okay. Last question, Billy. Hi guys, adore your podcast and your work. Long question for you. Buckle in. My firstborn darling 3-year-old son was born in the height of lockdowns in Melbourne and had traumatic birth. Induction, I was labouring alone for 24 hours. His partner wasn't allowed to be there until I was in the birth suite, etc., etc. Vacuum delivery, and then a special care nil by mouth due to a suspected infection, etc., etc.
Well done.
Sorry. At about 5 months postpartum, I was subsequently diagnosed with PND, postnatal depression.
Well done.
Yep, and spent time in a mother-baby unit. Though this is all we were, through this all we were obviously in lockdowns and had little physical support. My darling boy has always been an unsettled baby, an incredibly intense toddler. I have long suspected the birth trauma, and then my PND has played a part in challenging behaviours. We do our best to support him, and he has a wonderful network of grandparents and cousins, aunts, uncles around now. But still, I feel like behaviour in Batman-esque threat-seeking, connection-seeking and meltdowns to end all meltdowns. We don't think he is neurodivergent, but we'll continue to monitor this, of course. When you mentioned on the episode that trauma stops development at the age that it happens, what can I do about that now that I think the trauma was in the actual birth and first few months of his life? How can I truly support him to move through that trauma into a highly intelligent, sensitive, kind, wonderful boy that I see glimpses of? Thank you for all that you're doing.
Amazing. So many people ask this, and I just wanted to end on it because there's probably a lot of people hoping that their question, got up. But so many people said, tell me more about going back to where it happened. And there's no better example of that than the trauma that has happened to this poor mum and the kid at birth, and it's traumatizing, and that is trauma. So what's really important? We've talked about this. What's really important when kids are born? It's the most important thing that you can do with them. Newborn baby.
Hold them.
Yeah. Why?
To build connection, eye-to-eye connection.
Yep. So what else do you do? You put eye-to-eye, hold them.
I know the follow-up. Cradle them, rock them.
What decides all of those things and which ones you pick and why you're doing it?
I don't know. Their needs?
Yes, you're amazing at this. So what's really important in attachment is responsiveness, connection, eye to eye, You're smiling, I keep doing it. You look away from me, I change. You tense, you cry, I meet your needs, I respond to you. Do that. I don't care if the kid's 18.
Yep.
Do that. Go back to it. A lot of what we know about kids who are traumatized is that it is simple touch, it is simple sensory things, it is simple basic needs within their body that need to be met. And that's what babies need, and that's what a lot of adults that are traumatized need. You know, they need touch, they need soothing, they need connection, they need responsiveness and all of that stuff. That lights up all of our worlds. Like, you know, I can be having the most awful day and this just fleeting positive experience with someone else will turn me completely. And what we understand in kids that are traumatized, like we're hearing about with this kid, that Batman-esque, you know, hypervigilance, what Batman needed was people to go back to the little 10-year-old boy he was or however old he was and meet his needs there. This kid who has experienced this trauma at birth needs probably people to go back and just to tune in and connect with him. And the mum just needs to understand, I'm sure she's doing this, but just keep investing in that. Don't worry about talking to him and, you know, his reading and his vegetables and all that stuff. Just think, I think he's not going as well as he could be functionally in his emotional regulation, how hard he is on himself or whatever. I'm just going to spend time in his space and connecting with him and showing him that I'm there, you know, meeting his needs, responding to him. All that stuff just lifts his capacity to feel safe in the world, to help regulate his own emotions, to show him that he's unconditionally loved and supported, all of that stuff. And that's, all of us need that. I need that. I'm 40. I spent so much time talking about how I was in my late 30s, but I'm 40 now and I need that. I need that in relationships. Like I think the thing to end on is that, you know, I've been spending some time with some really long-term friends lately, and I remember Annalise saying, you know, they just make you feel good about yourself. And that's what we all need, is people that make us feel good about ourselves. And that's the predictability of kids who have experienced adverse childhood events and then gone on and had dysfunction. We've talked about the inflexibility. The other thing is how their primary caregivers feel about them. And we know one of the biggest risk factors is, I'm not sure I like him, he drives me up the wall, I'm finding this too hard, I have regrets. So meet those needs if you feel like that. That doesn't mean they're doomed either, but understand that that's what kids are just built to pick that up and soak it up. So make sure that you're doing the antidote to that.
Oh, right.
Yeah, it's the most important thing for all of us. But yeah,
they
that's
just pick it up, don't they?
Yeah, but that's not different from us. Like, you know, I don't know if you've ever been in a dysfunctional intimate relationship, but they can be awful and they're devastating for you because you're not having that connective need met. And so sometimes you'll think, I'm less than, I don't deserve this. You'll keep trying to seek it. Like, those are all adult behaviors, but they stem from childhood. You know, we all want to be validated, connected with, and that is the antidote to trauma. Like, we've talked in lots more detail about this in the previous one and in this one, but that's actually what the answer is. I'm valued, I'm unconditionally loved, someone's responding to me, supporting me, they delight in me, all of this stuff. And parents with mental illness, foster carers that are looking after them, teachers that have got traumatized kids in their environments, that's what all of us know that work in this space is. Those people will have a greater influence by doing those things than we will from starting medication, making a diagnosis, having a chat with them for 10 minutes, you know, every few months. That's where the power is. And that's, invest in that, in your own kids, the kids in your community, the kid that's saying negative things, the kid that's really struggling. Like, yeah, and that's what you do. You talk about that. You know, you would just have a stern chat to them, but what you actually do is you lift other kids. You've done it with the vet. You know, you light up and delight in her when she comes into your space, and that is protective for her. You know, that's people that do that with Evie have a special place in my heart because she doesn't have a lot of people that do it with her. But I invest heavily in relationships that do that for Evie because it meets a need that's in her that I can't meet. I can't meet that on my own. Annalise is a phenomenal parent. She can't meet that need in a vet on her own. So we have to do it collectively.
Yeah, it's important. The whole tribe.
Yeah, whole tribe.
Oh, what an episode, Billy.
Yeah. It might be the longest we've done.
Longest we've done by a country mile. I think the longest one was 89 minutes. And we're now at 108. But, no, it's been amazing. I just, I don't know, just to thank you for all the people that contributed, particularly the really tough stories, because I don't think I have these challenges in my life at the moment, and I'm so impressed that people taking the time to listen to the podcast, to learn more and try and help themselves. And you know, that mum who's got 2 sets of twins going and listen to your podcast. I've got some really succinct, quick questions for you, mate. And I'm like, of course you do, because you've got 4 kids that you're parenting on your own. You've got a ton of challenges. And I was just like, yep, my God, someone that takes the time to listen to us and then takes time to write a note. I'm just like, how impressive is that person? And that's the caliber of many other people who messaged. I just am.
Yeah, it's the best thing about this podcast.
Yeah, and just particularly these 2 episodes back to back. I'm just like, wow. Unbelievable.
Yeah, but I think we'll come back to it of all the topics that we
I feel like
to get back to topics. But we'll come back
definitely. Given the interest in it. So thanks very much, guys. So that wraps up the second part of developmental trauma. If you've for some reason missed the first one and want to sort of learn a bit more about the theory in the background that Billy might not have unpacked today, go back to episode 72. And give Batman Begins a bit of a watch as well. It's always fun to watch a movie along with the episode that we do, so I think you'll get a lot out of it. We'll be back. We've got 4 episodes left for the year, Billy. You haven't told me what's coming down the pipeline.
We got 3.
3 episodes, sorry.
Yeah.
4,
we can do it 4 if you want. We'll squeeze one in somewhere.
Another topic. No, we've got one more topic, and then we've got the Christmas special bonanza.
Yeah, so we're going to, just very quickly, Christmas special bonanza, we're going to do Griswold's Winslow's when people send them in and some curly questions. I just thought that would be good too.
Yep. And I'll bring some labels in for my cardigans because people are asking about those. And I'll share all of my knowledge. Awesome, Billy. Thanks heaps. Appreciate it. Thanks for listening, guys.
Hey, don't let your mother smell that beer on your breath. She'll take it out on me.
I don't want to see you again for the rest of my whole life. And I don't want to see anybody else either.
Who is your daddy and what does he do?
Just use your best judgment. We trust you.